You can follow every rule, pay every fee, but when a HOA Karen gets a whiff of imaginary power, nothing is ever enough. All I wanted was to build a safe place for my family, a small storm shelter hidden neatly in my backyard. But somehow, that made me the target of a sick obsession called HOA standards. And when they chose to break into my property, they had no idea. They were walking straight into a trap with no way out. My name is Mark Lawson. And that day, I was working in the little room behind my house when the phone screen next to me started buzzing violently. Part of it was because the thunder had already started rumbling in the distance, the kind of weather anyone living in Texas learns to fear. But the alert that popped up wasn't from the weather service. It was a motion detection alert. From the security system of the storm shelter buried in my backyard. I glanced quickly at the screen and nearly spilled my coffee all over the desk. It was her. Mona Jennings, the self-appointed president of the Magnolia Creek HOA. There she was, strutting down the storm shelter steps, clutching a cheap flashlight in one hand, a bolt cutter, dangling from the other wrist like she was leading some elite special ops mission. That look on her face, a mix of giddy excitement and nervous dread, made it seem like she was sneaking into a classified government bunker. Before I could even fully process what I was seeing, bam! The heavy steel door above slammed shut with a crisp click. The biometric locks and motion sensors automatically activated, just as they were designed to. She was trapped. 3 meters underground. Alone. Right as a storm was rolling in. I stared at the live footage on the screen and I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. Sometimes, the universe really does hand out justice without asking for help. Mona, who had spent months sending letters, plastering notices, and spamming endless emails about community aesthetics and public safety, was now imprisoned by the very storm shelter she had so passionately hated. No one lifted a finger. No arguments needed. She did it to herself. I set my coffee cup down, leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and watched the screen. One thought flashed through my mind. Should I call emergency services, or grab some popcorn and enjoy the free show? This didn't just happen out of nowhere. It had been brewing for months. Every email, every veiled threat, every overreach by a textbook HOA Karen. And I knew, to truly savor the sweet satisfaction of this moment, you'd need to hear the story from the beginning, about a man who just wanted peace, and a HOA Karen who didn't know where to stop. Everything started about 6 months ago when I decided to install a personal storm shelter right behind my lawn. It wasn't just paranoia. Living in Texas, if you don't have a storm shelter, you're basically one tornado away from death. I wasn't building some military bunker either. It was just a small steel door, completely hidden under an artificial turf patch, so seamless that, from a distance, you couldn't even tell it apart from the regular lawn. Invisible, safe, legal, and fully compliant with building codes. I even went the extra mile, secured all necessary construction permits, got approved for a federal disaster mitigation grant, hired professional contractors to reinforce the shelter to safety standards. No mistakes, no loopholes. But to Mona Jennings, the self-appointed president of the HOA, none of that mattered. In the first week after completion, I received the first HOA letter. Please be advised that any modifications affecting the overall appearance of the community must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Architectural Review Committee? The committee she and 2 yoga pants and wine buddies cooked up themselves, I politely replied via email. Dear Mrs. Jennings, this structure is entirely underground, does not affect the aesthetic or structural surface, and has full approval from all relevant building and federal authorities. Best regards. I thought that was the end of it. I was so naive. A week later, I got a violation notice taped to my door, a warning email from the Aesthetic Standards Maintenance Committee. A handwritten card, neatly scripted, saying, "Non-compliance will result in serious consequences." It was a pink card, decorated with butterfly stickers. Good Lord, who threatens someone with a birthday card? Gradually, it turned into professional harassment. Mona and her minions would circle my house every evening, scrutinizing every blade of grass. Random photographs of my front gate, taken from every angle, started appearing in HOA emails titled, "Concerns about Neighborhood Standards." A special emergency meeting was held, with the sole agenda item being the negative impact of hidden structures on community property values. You'd think I was building a nuclear plant out back, but I stood firm. I didn't dismantle the shelter. I didn't bow to a self-invented HOA standard with no legal standing. I knew my rights, and I was ready to defend them, to the end. Maybe it was that refusal to yield that finally pushed Mona over the edge. When letters, warnings, and meetings couldn't break me, she decided to act personally, a decision that she would soon come to regret. Mona Jennings really should have stopped while she still could. But no, once a HOA Karen goes off the rails, logic has no place left. That afternoon, I was sitting at my favorite coffee shop about 5 miles from home. Laptop opens in front of me, working remotely while enjoying a thick, rich cappuccino when, ding, my phone buzzer, a notification from the backyard security camera system. Motion detected. Backyard storm shelter zone. I tapped the alert, connecting straight to the live feed. And what I saw almost made me spit coffee all over my screen. Mona Jennings, wearing a white blouse, light jeans, and oversized sunglasses, was crouching around my backyard lawn. Right. Alongside her were two distinguished supporting characters. Gina Brown, self-appointed president of the Community Beauty Maintenance Committee. Harold Simmons, part-time neighborhood busybody, full-time professional complainer. The HOA trio skulked around my yard like clumsy second-rate predators. Mona raised her hand, gesturing like some covert ops commander. Gina pulled out her phone to film. Harold dug into his backpack and pulled out a mid-sized bolt cutter, the kind meant for snapping locks. I literally had to pinch myself to believe my eyes. They were actually trying to break into my storm shelter. In broad daylight, during storm season, on private, legally protected property. Mona bent over, zeroing in on the storm shelter hatch, cleverly concealed under a patch of synthetic turf. I watched her snip the cheap outer padlock, the one meant to deter casual snoopers. The real lock mechanism was hidden below. She yanked the heavy steel door open and waved her team forward. "Quick, check inside. Find any violations." Harold and Gina hesitated. Nobody wanted to crawl into a 3-meter-deep hole right before a thunderstorm. But Mona, eyes blazing with fake righteous fury, stepped onto the stairs leading underground herself. The internal shelter cameras flicked on. I watched through my screen as Mona swung her flashlight around the high-grade, Category 5 rated shelter interior. She muttered under her breath, shaking her head. Unauthorized construction, non-compliant aesthetics, no HOA approval. There will be consequences. And then, click! The hatch door slammed shut automatically, the electronic lock engaging instantly. Military-grade biometric security. Once the system detected an intruder, it locked down, and only my fingerprint could open it. Mona Jennings was now trapped underground during storm season, with no way out. I leaned back in my chair at the coffee shop, smirking. The perfect trap. No need to lift a finger. Just let the HOA Karen walk herself into it. Now I faced a delicious decision. Rush home and rescue Mona immediately. Or enjoy a little more of this real-life comedy show, letting her reflect on her life choices in a cold, locked bunker. Either way, I knew one thing. For certain, Mona had made a fatal mistake. underestimating the power of private property rights in America. I watched the live stream from the shelter's security camera, sipping my coffee, the corners of my mouth curling up. Mona Jennings, the self-proclaimed HOA president, queen of fake standards, was panicking like a chicken trapped in a coop. At first, she tried to maintain composure. She tapped lightly on the steel door. She shouted loudly, calling for Harold and Gina. She even attempted some fake commanding tone. "Open this door! I order you!" And Harold and Gina. Through the backyard cameras, I watched them sprint away, the moment the shelter door slammed shut, leaving Mona alone like a lost child abandoned at the park. When things got tough, the HOA comrades vanished in an instant. Classic Karen spirit, to the bone. Inside the shelter, Mona started to lose it. She pounded her fists on the door until the backs of her hands turned red. She swung the bolt cutter wildly against the steel walls, and only ended up hurting herself more. She rummaged frantically around the shelter, hoping to find some hidden escape hatch. But there wasn't one. The system was designed for a single purpose: to keep people safe and to keep intruders inside. Meanwhile, the real storm had begun raging outside. The wind howled in gusts. Thunder hammered the sky with deafening roars. Through the camera feed, I saw Mona's flashlight starting to flicker, the battery slowly dying. Now she wasn't just trapped, she was trapped in the dark. I set my coffee cup down on the table. It was time to make a decision. Call emergency services? No need. The shelter was rated for high-category storms, waterproof, fully stocked with backup air supplies. Legally speaking, Mona wasn't in mortal danger. The only thing at risk was her overinflated ego. I picked up my phone, turned on the speaker, and dialed directly into the shelter's internal comm system. A beep echoed inside. Keeping my voice calm, I said, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Jennings. Welcome to the Mark Lawson Storm Shelter. Your unauthorized entry has been logged. Due to security protocol activation, the shelter door will only reopen upon valid identity confirmation. Please remain calm, enjoy the safety of this storm-rated facility, and reflect on your choices." Inside the shelter, Mona spun around, staring at the camera, her face twisted in pure, constipated rage. "You can't do this! I'm the HOA president! I have rights!" she screamed. I just shook my head and chuckled softly. "On my land, the only law here is mine, and you are just an uninvited guest." I cut off the comms, leaned back in my chair, and laced my fingers behind my head. Part of me wanted to leave Mona down there a little longer, to let her massive ego deflate along with her dying flashlight battery. But another part of me, the part raised by my grandfather who taught me about showing mercy even to fools, knew that eventually I would have to open the door, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to do the right thing. Outside, the storm howled. Underground, the HOA Karen was learning the biggest lesson of her life, and I, Mark Lawson, sat high above, calm as a watchman on an ancient fortress, watching the invaders, crushed not by my hands, but by the walls they dared to challenge. The storm outside had started to ease, thunder rumbling faintly toward the horizon. Meanwhile, underground, Mona Jennings had shifted from rage to full-blown chaos. When I decided it was time to release her, I also decided exactly how I would do it. No rush, no apologies, and absolutely no letting her forget this humiliating moment. I grabbed my tablet, opened the security system app. With a single light tap, the shelter's locks began to disengage. Click. Hiss. The heavy steel door creaked open, slowly, casting a faint shaft of light down into the pitch-black hole. Mona shot out of the shelter like a cat doused in a bucket of water. Her white blouse was stained with dirt, hair a tangled mess, sunglasses tilted awkwardly on her forehead. She looked like a bootleg Lara Croft who had just crawled out of a disaster site. I stood leaning casually against the back door frame, arms folded across my chest, greeting her with the calmest expression I could muster. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Jennings. Enjoy your tour of the Mark Lawson storm shelter?" Mona gasped for breath, her face as red as an overripe tomato. You'll pay for this. You locked me in. I'll sue. I'll call the police. I'm the HOA president. I have rights." I shrugged. "Oh, you're welcome to try. But before you do, you might want to review the state laws on unlawful trespass onto private property. And maybe also remember, the entire incident has been recorded. From cutting the lock, to forced entry, to your lovely little meltdown. Inside the shelter, I raised my phone, its screen flashing the live camera feed logo, undeniable, irrefutable proof. Mona froze like she'd been hit with a bucket of ice water. And for the first time, I saw something new in her eyes. Fear. We can settle this quietly, right?" Mona stammered, her voice losing all its previous bravado. I smiled, a polite, razor-sharp smile. "Of course. I believe in handling things lawfully. You'll be receiving a letter from my attorney very soon, along with a formal demand for damages and a public apology. Oh, and you might want to prepare for the upcoming special community meeting. It's going to be entertaining." Mona stood there, trembling, too stunned to say another word. She staggered toward the sidewalk, her mud-caked shoes slipping and sliding. No need to chase her. She had already destroyed her own reputation in front of the entire community. I turned back into the house and closed the door behind me. Peace. Just the way I had wanted from the start. No yelling, no threats, just letting the truth quietly, inexorably do its job. Just one day after the storm shelter incident, Emma Dalton, a lawyer friend from my college days, and I had finished preparing the lawsuit documents. Charges: unlawful trespassing on private property, destruction of property, cutting, the lock. Harassment, and if Mona Jennings still dared to deny it, my security cameras had captured every single second. No omissions. I sent an official demand letter to the Magnolia Creek HOA office, demanding a public apology to the community, full compensation for damages, and withdrawal of all false complaints regarding the Mark Lawson storm shelter within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in a civil lawsuit filed with the county court. Attached were footage of the break-in, certified property ownership documents, approved construction blueprints. In less than 48 hours, Mona Jennings vanished from her HOA president seat. No apology, no farewell speech, just one curt email sent to all residents. Due to personal health reasons, I am stepping down from HOA activities. Wishing the Magnolia Creek community continued prosperity. Personal health reasons, huh? Maybe an allergic reaction to legal consequences. But the story didn't end there. Several residents, long simmering with resentment over Mona's authoritarian rule, seized the moment to blow everything wide open. They demanded a full audit of the HOA's funds. They called for the abolition of all unofficial regulations Mona had arbitrarily imposed. They insisted on restructuring the leadership, with people who actually understood that community management isn't a power game. 1 week later, at an emergency resident meeting, I was invited to speak. I stepped onto the wooden podium, looking directly into the faces that had once been indifferent, suspicious, submissive to the HOA. My voice was low but firm. We may differ in many things: how we cut our grass, the color we paint our homes, the types of cars we park on our streets. But we do not differ in the most fundamental rights: the right to ownership, the right to freedom, and the right to be respected on our own land. If we allow an HOA to overreach, sooner or later, we'll lose more than a boat, a storm shelter, or a blade of grass. We'll lose the very freedom to live the lives we choose. The entire room rose in applause, not polite clapping. Real applause, the kind from people who were seeing, maybe for the first time, someone standing up to fight for the values they thought had been forgotten. That day, Magnolia Creek changed. A new HOA was elected. No more self-appointed councils. No more murky rules. Only a clear respect for the boundary between community rights and individual rights. And me, Mark Lawson? I didn't need to do anything more than lead by action, not by grandstanding speeches. Sometimes the only way to teach the arrogant a lesson is to let them crash headfirst into the wall they built themselves. While I returned to my ordinary life, peaceful and free, news about Mona Jennings spread rapidly throughout Magnolia Creek. According to a few neighbors who had their private channels, she had hastily sold her house at 20% below market value. Left Magnolia Creek in the middle of the night. No farewell party, no thank you notes. Received a demand letter from her former HOA seeking restitution for serious violations during her tenure. From a self-proclaimed queen to a disgraced fugitive. I didn't take joy in another's misfortune, but I firmly believed one thing. She got exactly what she sowed. Meanwhile, the Magnolia Creek community entered a new era. This time, the HOA board elections were transparent, public, and clean. No more absurd rules about the glossiness of mailbox surfaces. No more secret kitchen meetings forcing people into agreements. No one stood above the rights of the residents anymore. A group of residents, including myself, proposed a new initiative. Community first. Operating principles, absolute respect for personal property. Only intervene in matters that truly affect public safety. Any new regulations must be passed through open majority vote. The day the initiative passed, I stood on my porch, watching neighbors laughing, helping each other rebuild fences that had fallen during the last storm. No threats, no warning citations taped to doors. Just ordinary people, doing the right thing because they wanted to. A week later, I hung a small hand-carved plaque on my gate. This land respects freedom, and those who respect it in return. And as for the Mark Lawson storm shelter, I installed a new 360-degree camera. Not to guard against Mona, but to remind myself, freedom isn't defended just once. It must be safeguarded every single day. Standing on the wooden steps, filling my lungs with the scent of rain-soaked grass, I knew I hadn't just reclaimed a backyard. I had reclaimed the right to live my own life and helped shape a better community. And sometimes, when lightning flickers in the far-off sky, I still chuckle, remembering the day Mona Jennings trapped herself in the very pit dug by her own arrogance. A month after the storm shelter war, Magnolia Creek was more peaceful than ever. No more absurd notices plastered on doors. No more HOA meetings that felt like court trials. Only the sound of children laughing, lawnmowers buzzing, and friendly greetings between true neighbors. I tidied up my backyard, straightened the artificial turf covering the storm shelter hatch. Everything looked normal again. But inside me, nothing was quite the same. I had learned a precious lesson from the battle against Mona Jennings and her self-appointed HOA cronies. Freedom is not something given. Freedom is something you must be, willing to stand up and fight for, every time it is threatened. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with the law, with steadfastness, and with wisdom. I also realized, sometimes you're not just defending yourself. You're defending those who are too tired, too busy, or too afraid to stand up themselves. And in doing so, you don't just save a backyard, you save the very concept of a real community. I went down into the storm shelter once more to inspect the system. The cameras were running perfectly. The door sensors are flawless, the solar panels are stable. On the wall of the shelter, I mounted a small plaque. Freedom isn't free. It's earned and defended. That night, I sat on the porch with a cold beer in hand, watching the stars rise. The evening breeze swept through our little neighborhood, carrying away the weariness of battles fought. Magnolia Creek had been reborn, not because of a powerful HOA, but because of ordinary people who dared to say no when their freedom was under siege. And I, Mark Lawson, knew that whenever necessary, I would be ready to stand up again. Because there are things that cannot be sold, cannot be bargained, and absolutely cannot be taken by any HOA Karen. Today, my backyard still rests peacefully under the sunlight. No more HOA Karens lurking and nitpicking. No more veiled threats dressed up as community standards. I didn't just reclaim ownership for myself. I reclaimed a voice for an entire community that had almost fallen asleep. Because freedom is never something someone can grant you. Freedom is something you must protect. With knowledge, with courage, and when necessary, with a cold, unapologetic silence. Because here, on this land, the only law I follow is the law of freedom.